Do you know for sure that you have Lyme disease? Because getting a diagnosis can be very tricky. The reason it's so difficult is because the Lyme disease microbes can evade the immune system, making it very difficult to pick up on it. Plus, the tests are based on antibodies, not on the microbes themselves. So it's really measuring your immune system's reaction to the microbes rather than the Lyme disease microbes themselves, which makes testing very, very difficult. Many people have a negative Lyme disease test even after showing all of the regular symptoms that you would think is Lyme disease. So there's two standard Lyme disease tests. They are the ELISA test and the Western blot. The ELISA test is known for having poor sensitivity. If it's too early in having Lyme disease, you won't pick up any antibodies in the ELISA test. Therefore, the test will come up negative even though you do have Lyme disease bacteria. It's just not picking up the antibody response because it's too early in the infection process. This makes the ELISA test subpar at best. So the secondary test people use is a Western blot test. Now the Western blot test is more reliable, but it can miss more cases, especially when it comes to long-term chronic Lyme disease. These types of cases have different fluctuations in the antibodies in their system, and it can go unmatched on the Western blot test and unnoticed. Therefore, it could be a false negative test with a Western blot as well. There is some controversy around the Western blot test in that there are some bands that were originally on the test that got removed from the test around the time that the Lyme disease vaccine came out. So that's something worth reading into and checking out if you're into that sort of thing. So why do false negatives happen with Lyme disease testing? There are three main reasons. The first reason is you're testing too early and no antibodies have been created in your immune system yet to fight back against the Lyme disease bacteria. The second reason is immune system suppression. So your immune system is so suppressed from the Lyme disease bacteria. They have so many different ways to evade the immune system. So your immune system can get suppressed and kind of pushed down, in which case you wouldn't be creating enough antibodies to then show up on the test. So that's another reason false negatives can happen. Number three is strain variability, which just means there's so many different kinds of strains of this bacteria that can cause different problems. In fact, there's 20 tick-borne diseases that we know of that can come from a tick, but there's so many more bacteria that we haven't yet figured out that are also involved in the human body and the tick body. Since there's so many different strains of Lyme disease bacteria, it's very difficult to diagnose. So that's the three reasons why false negatives happen. But what about more accurate Lyme tests? What can we do to take the best test to make sure that we can get that diagnosis if we need to know what we're dealing with? And the first thing is specialty lab tests. So places like IGeneX or Armin Labs, these types of labs can give you very advanced tests for Lyme disease, like PCR tests, which we'll talk about in a minute. But they actually are testing for the bacteria itself, not for the antibodies created in your immune system, which makes it a lot more accurate, a lot more specific, and a lot more sensitive, so we can get that positive diagnosis, so we can know what we're up against when we're fighting the war against Lyme disease. The only problem is those tests can get expensive. Second, we have PCR testing, which is when they test for Lyme disease DNA inside of your blood. So it's a lot more specific and a lot more reliable way to get a diagnosis from Lyme disease, since they're testing for DNA specifically. However, PCR testing is not always reliable. It still has some holes in that testing as well. Just like any test, there's a difference between the sensitivity and the variability and the amount of information you can get from each different test. And finally, there's at-home testing, which is newer, and it can vary, obviously, depending on price point and company you use. The accuracy will vary, but it's a convenient and interesting option that I like to know exists. So if you want, check out some home testing kits, because maybe you can get some great information from those as well. So my personal experience with Lyme disease testing is actually pretty minimal. I did have a Lyme disease test which came back negative. It was the ELISA test, and that was just early on in my testing experience. As I went through everything, my symptoms were telling me a different story. I didn't trust that a negative test was true. And it was a frustrating testing cycle, which is a big reason why I share content like this. But once they realized I had the rash on my skin, and I took a more specialized test. They were able to see, okay, this is Lyme disease, and it really just hit home what I already knew. I already knew that I had Lyme disease, but it was just proof that, okay, now I definitely have Lyme disease. But again, I understand why it's so frustrating for so many people not to have the answers that they need, not to know what they're fighting against when they're trying to get better. Over the years, I've heard so many stories about people with Lyme disease not getting the diagnosis quickly enough. So I wanted to do whatever I could to help, which is why we created freelymetest.com. All it does is ask you some simple questions, but it lets you know your risk level and your likeliness of having Lyme disease and what exactly you're dealing with, whether it's green, yellow, or red. Red meaning you definitely have Lyme disease, green meaning, hey, it could be something else. And that test is available at freelymetest.com for anybody to take for free so that you can get the information that you need to see if you should be dealing with Lyme disease or something different. So assess your symptoms and risk at freelymetest.com. I'll see you over there. So as you can see, Lyme testing is far from perfect, but getting a diagnosis can be life-changing for some people. When you don't know what you're fighting against, it just makes things so much harder mentally. It makes it a more difficult slog as you go through the process and the motions to try and heal, but you're not even sure what you're fighting against. So getting that diagnosis can be absolutely life-changing. You can check out your symptoms and your risk profile by going to freelymetest.com, and you can, of course, do whatever you can to get testing by talking to your doctor, and also by using things like IGeneX or Armin labs that have deep specialty labs that can help you get the diagnosis for Lyme disease if you need to. If you're experiencing symptoms, listen to your body, okay? And if you want to get your symptoms and your risk profile, go to freelymetest.com. And if you want, share your Lyme testing experience below. I'd love to hear what you've been through and what different things you've tried and how you're going about this whole testing experience on your Lyme disease journey. Let's open this up to the community so we can discuss the best potential avenues for each and every one of us. And I'll see you next time.